Katie tells you about today, it's not just about how something that can be applied to doing research, but when I heard it the first time, I also realized that it applies to anytime you're researching a project or making a big decision because, well, I'll just talk to you about it later. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Katie.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to join us today. I appreciate you taking the time out to come to this presentation, and I hope you find it worthwhile. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Jones. I am the reference librarian in the library, which basically means that I'm the one who's mostly in charge of instruction and teaching our students how to use library resources and how to do research. So a little bit about my background. My background is in education. I got my undergrad from centenary in music education and quickly realized that while I love teaching and I love music, I didn't necessarily love teaching music. So that led me to get my master's from LSU in library and information science. And while I was there, I was lucky enough to be able to kind of focus on instruction within a library setting. One of my favorite classes while I was there was one called User Services Analysis. So what was nice about that is we were able to both evaluate how our users were enjoying and using our services, as well as being able to anticipate some of their needs as they were doing research. And one person we discussed a lot in that class as it pertains to information search behaviors was Carol Kuhlthau, who is a very influential researcher in cognitive and emotional responses people have, come on in, to finding and evaluating new information. So I know that I was able to apply her findings not just to my emotional state as a grad student doing research, but also as an instructor, so I can, anytime someone comes in to the library really flustered and upset, I can usually pinpoint why it is. So hopefully today we can get a better idea of kind of what our students are feeling emotionally as they do some of these assignments, and maybe some tips of how to anticipate that and maybe help them through that process. So a little bit about Carol Kuhlthau. She is a professor emeritus at Rutgers University, where she received both her master's and her doctorate of education, and that's also where she spent the majority of her career. So she spent a lot of time at Rutgers, and then she's a very highly regarded American educator, researcher, and international speaker. Her research focused on school libraries, information literacy, and information-seeking behavior. But even though it was school libraries, it still applies to how students look for information and then evaluate that information when they are searching for it. So she wrote several articles, 3 books, but her most famous article was actually her doctoral dissertation called Inside the Search Process, Information Seeking from the User's Perspective. And that's been cited over 150 times in other scholarly articles and studies. So it's very highly regarded in the information literacy world. So a little bit about the ISP, or information search process. Kuhlthau defines the information search process as the user's constructive activity of finding meaning from information in order to extend his or her state of knowledge on a particular problem or topic. So basically, how they find that information and what they do with that information. A little bit about this study, or this article that she did. For years prior, the dominating discussion in the library science world was over relevancy, or basically whether or not an article will work for a specific topic. So the usual conclusion was, well, the users don't know what they need, so we as information search professionals and librarians will just tell them what they need. So obviously we can all pretty much gather that's not necessarily true. If I was to go to the nursing department and say, oh, you need some articles, here are all the articles you need, obviously these are going to be the best ones, they would probably laugh at me because they have more to consider than what I could just give them. But one of the people who first started to look at emotions when determining relevancy was Brenda Durbin. And then Kuhlthau took this a step further to say, okay, well, if emotions dictate whether or not an article will be relevant to a person's topic, then they're probably also going to dictate how this person is feeling when they're doing the research. So she took this a step further for her dissertation. And what she did is she studied the emotional and cognitive reactions of students while they were writing a research paper. And she looked at a class of 11th graders. They did 2 research papers, one in the fall and one in the spring. And what she did is she had them write journals and had several interviews and keep notes on the way they were feeling and how that process was going. So she kept really detailed notes and logs of what each of these students was experiencing. And what she started to find was that while some of the students were progressing a little better than others, they were all generally going through the same steps, the same emotions. And so from that, she was able to develop the information search process, or ISP. And then in 2008, Kuhlthau decided, well, with the expansive technology and the use of digital resources, I want to see if this still is legitimate today. So she redid the study and did find that it still holds up today. If you want to. And so that's just a little bit about it. Oh, one thing I did not, 2 things I didn't mention actually, that it was the first time that any qualitative research had been done in library science. Usually they were just going to look at the numbers and the statistics. This time, since it was those logs, the interviews, it was the first time qualitative research had been used in library and information science. And also this process is a nonlinear process, which I'll discuss a little bit more in a second. But let's look. We're going to just kind of briefly look over this, and then we'll look at each of the steps individually. But this is the model of the information search process. Those last 2 will generally be put in one step. But you have initiation, selection, exploration, formulation, collection, presentation, and assessment. And then here are their feelings, their thoughts, and their actions during each of those processes. So let's go ahead and look at the first stage. The first stage is going to be initiation. During this step, this is really more on the professor side or the student side if they're having their own kind of recreational information need. But this is when they just recognize that they need information, or often when the professor assigns an assignment. So at this point, they're going to get the prompt and they have to sit and they have to evaluate, okay, where do I go from here? What is the process? What do I need to do? Is this a paper? Is it a project? What kind of information do I need? So it's really kind of the preparation for the research assignment. And during this time, their emotional response is going to be apprehension. I'm sure many of you here have given students assignments and they're automatically stressed about it. Whether they've looked at the assignment or not, usually that apprehension and uncertainty starts to go through the roof without ever having looked at the assignment before. So I'm sure a lot of you have probably seen that happen. As far as the cognitive response, it is a vague understanding, and that they're going to know that they have an assignment, but they're not going to really quite know what it is they need to do yet. And then for the strategies, brainstorming, discussing what that topic might be and how they might move forward. Stage 2 is going to be selection. This is when they actually select a general topic. At this point, they often do feel a little bit better once they have chosen a topic, and their emotional response is going to be optimism. Once they've made the decision of what that assignment's going to be, they're ready to begin. Hopefully, that's what we hope. And the cognitive response is still a vague understanding. All they've done is selected the topic. They haven't really gotten into the nitty-gritty of what the topic's going to be or what it covers. So one of the strategies here is, in preparation of selecting a topic, is to use general sources to start getting kind of a background information on what this topic actually covers. So remember that we do at this point have optimism, but then we move to the third step where we do not have optimism. At this point, you have exploration. So that's when the students start looking for different articles and papers to use for their topic, and they start to realize, or usually realize, that they're in a little bit over their head. They might not know the terminology, they might not know what, some of the articles may be a little bit above where they are, so they get the emotional response of confusion, uncertainty, and increasing doubt. This is often the most stressful stage. This is when you see the students just completely freaking out. I can't do this. I don't know what this assignment is. I thought I was doing really well. I can't find anything. So this is usually the step that stumps most people. And one of the things we can most help our students to do is to help them through that uncertainty. This is where they often get stumped and where some students inevitably stay. The cognitive response is still a vague understanding, but one of the strategies here is often the problem is either the topic initially was too broad. I've seen some history students say, oh, I'm supposed to write a paper on anything having to do with history from 1600, and they don't know where to move forward from that. Or it's very, very specific and they're not able to find information. So usually it just takes kind of tweaking the topic a little bit. So they need to read about the topic, they need to get a general understanding, and also listing some usual terminology so that they can have a better foundation of what this topic covers. One of the things I usually like to recommend that may surprise people, especially if this is a topic that the students aren't familiar with, brace yourselves, try Wikipedia. Now I know that for a librarian to say that is very taboo, but Wikipedia is often a good place to go to just get a little bit of background information. If I'm an allied health student doing a presentation on a disorder that I've never heard of, well, maybe it's okay to look at the Wikipedia article, get a little bit of background information of what that is, some of the terminology they start to use in that article, and that way when I start to do some more in-depth research, I have a better foundation for what to do. So don't use it for your paper, but usually that's a good place to get a little bit of background information. So step 4 is going to be formulation. This is where they're going to form a more focused perspective of the topic. So if they're able to move through that step of an uncertainty, they're going to hopefully be able to say, okay, maybe my topic was too broad, maybe it was too specific, let me tweak that topic just a little bit, and they're going to have a more specific focus. Their emotional response here will be confidence. Once they've moved through that bit of uncertainty and they have more of a plan, they're going to feel a little bit better. So their sense of clarity increases. The cognitive response is a more focused understanding. If they have a better foundation for what the topic entails, then just the whole idea of scaffolding, they can continue to move forward and up from where they were. And then some of the strategies here are to combine some of the themes and the things that they've been discovering through some of their collection process to be able to make themes and more of a plan of action. Next, after they've kind of narrowed down that topic, we're going to switch to the collection phase. A lot of the problem may be that students only think that they need to search for information once. Usually it's better, and we all like to say this in an ideal world, if the research process was kind of multi-layered. And so you would begin to look at the more general topics, and then once you had a better understanding, you can start looking at the more specific topics. That is what works best. That's what works best in an ideal world. Obviously, that's not always the case. But with the collection phase, this is when they start to gather information on that focused topic. So they have better search terms during their searches. They generally know where to find the information a little better. So their confidence continues to increase because now they know better where to find some of this information. The cognitive response is an increase in understanding of the topic because they're able to do more in-depth research and look at it at a much higher level thinking than they were initially. And hopefully interest in the project deepens. I'm sure a lot of you have probably had that experience where you were supposed to do some sort of presentation or write a paper that you didn't know about initially, but the more you got into it, the more interested you became in the topic as you had a better understanding of it. And then some of the strategies here are really, since this is a more active stage, this is going to be the search stage, is to use that terminology to search for resources, and then also to seek the assistance of a librarian. Because if the case is they kind of know what they want to find, but they don't know how, this is when a librarian can kind of step in and definitely help them in the more specific processes of how to search for information, specifically in databases or books or things like that. And then finally, we have the closure stage, which is often split up into presentation and assessment. This phase is pretty much what are we going to do with the information now that we have it? So usually that does entail either presenting that information in some way, whether it be in a paper or a project or a presentation, or just generally assessing what you did with that information. And I'll give you another example of that in a second. But the activity is going to be to complete the search and prepare to present or to use whatever information you found in some way. The emotional response, we hope, is relief and a sense of satisfaction. Often, as we know, that's not necessarily the case, but that's usually because some of those earlier steps weren't completely followed through. So we hope that by the end, once they've presented, once they've turned in a paper, that they'll feel a lot better with the work that they've done. And that cognitive response is going to be increased self-awareness because at this point they do feel better about themselves. They feel better that they were able to do some of this more complex thinking about whatever the topic was. And then some of the strategies as far as whether it be for a paper or a presentation is to keep some of those books so that they can recheck the information and back things up in their mind. So again, this is the last step, presentation and assessment. But I want to look at the whole thing again now that we've looked at each of the parts and see how it fits together. So we start with the initial project, the initial search question. Then we get our sense of optimism once we've said, okay, now I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to move forward with that. And then we have the crushing doubt once we realize we don't know as much as we thought we did. And then once we kind of regain our composure, we can move forward to narrowing down our topic, finding information on that topic, and then presenting the topic and assessing how we think we did. We start with kind of a vague cognitive understanding, focus it, and then finally hopefully end with an increased self-awareness. And then here are all of the physical actions that we take during those processes. Now I did mention that this is a non-linear process, and what I meant by that was you don't always start at stage 1 and end at stage 6 or 7. What will often happen is maybe the student will do a topic that they already know quite a bit about. So they can almost skip the first few and start with the formulation collection if they already have a good kind of understanding of what the terminology is and what that focus topic is going to be. You'll also find that they may start getting to the collection phase, realize that they still aren't specific on the topic that they have, and they may need to take it back a step to refocus that topic. So you may kind of jump back around if you get to a certain point, realize, I'm not as prepared as I thought I was. Maybe I need to read some more of the terminology. Maybe I need to rethink what my topic was going to be. And I guess I'll take this moment to steal the example that Allison had in the last presentation, which she was saying how much this would apply maybe if you were buying a new car. You would start initially saying, yes, I want to purchase a new car, but I don't really know how to purchase a new car. So I need to start looking, well, what car might I need? And so you need to learn some of the terminology. How do I get a loan? Where should I go? So that's going to be some of that initial searching, and then I know I would feel completely confused and apprehensive when I start to realize that it's a really difficult process and I'm going to owe many thousands of dollars, so I want to make the right decision. But as you start to get some of that background information on what the best car dealership is, what kind of loan you want, what kind of car you want, then you start to focus your search, and hopefully at the end you feel a lot better about the process. Did I do a good job explaining that?
So I moved from stage 3 on Thursday night at 5 o'clock. Now I'm in stage 5. So I moved through the confusion, and now,
now you're focusing. Hopefully when you buy it, you'll feel good. You can assess the job you did, and you'll feel better. All right, so now for application. How can we use this? For instructors, if you'll go ahead and click the next one, thank you. One of the things I like to suggest, now I want to say this, and by no means am I telling you how to do your class or how to form your assignments, but usually with assignments, the more detailed the students get, the better they're going to do, especially when it comes to prompts. If you just say, okay, do topic on anything that we've covered in the class at all. While you may think you're doing them a favor and that you've given them lots of options, often that causes a lot of apprehension because they don't quite have examples in their mind of what that means. They may be a little uncertain as to what some possible topics could be. So detailed assignments, detailed prompts are usually going to give them a little more confidence as they begin, because they can kind of focus in and narrow in on more specific topics. Also, just guidance during these research projects. Anytime you start seeing the students really freaking out, that is a bad way to say that, but it's quite true. Often, and I've said this many times to students who come into the library, is just let them know this is normal. The way you're feeling is normal. You can get over it. Here's how we can move forward. So when they are feeling stressed out, just let them know this stress is okay. It will pass. And then just being able to anticipate those issues. If you know that the students are going to have some problems with terminology or maybe focusing in on those topics, by anticipating those, you can better help them. Then for the students, I know that when I was in grad school, knowing this as a student, when I learned it, I wish that I'd known it for a while, because I could kind of look at the emotions I was having at the time and really understand, like, oh, that's what was happening. So when you are able to understand your emotional process, then you're less likely to just throw the towel in when you get in that third stage and are just completely confused. So that goes with that last one of working through the uncertainty, which is often the most difficult problem for our students, is once they start to feel like they aren't doing well, they're just going to give up. And we don't want them to give up, because if they just kind of push through it, they're going to do well. So that's how you can apply it to our assignments. And then here are some of the resources I use, especially a few of her articles on the process. But at this point, are there any questions? No? At all? I hope that maybe you can use this, that this wasn't a complete waste of time.
I think if I had known this when I taught research papers, I explained it to my students as like the process, the grief, the stages of grief. But it's really not the stages of grief. It's a little bit different. You know, it has some of that same shock, confusion, disorientation, and then acceptance. But I think this strategy really does help define it. But applying it to my own life, and that would be a new to me car, a used car. I've been stuck for about 6 months in the confusion stage, because it's like, this is just too difficult. I hadn't found any car that made my socks roll up and down, so I'm just stuck here till I find it. So then over the weekend, I was able to sort of move through and list the terminology, figure out what I wanted to focus on, you know, what I could live without. And so that was very helpful. I think
forming a plan just in itself, pushing through the uncertainty. But yeah, so I guess that is all I had today. That was really quick, sorry. But if there aren't any questions, I'll stick around for a while in case anybody has any questions.
If you hadn't received an evaluation, I'm not sure if I have enough. This is a bigger crowd than I expected. Yay, wonderful. Be sure and grab a treat, because I don't want to have to walk all the way back over to A with all these treats and things. So take one with you. Be sure and sign in if you hadn't signed in yet. And thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you.